So this is the latest part of the diagnosis of Fleet Street of today, Friday, the 11th of September 2020. Now, as I said, that we'll be taking a look again at the role being played by the local councils, such as the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council and the London Borough of Newham in East London, in creating homelessness, housing, and lack of rights and lack of recourse to remedies through the law and the legal system. And I said that that has to be seen as a part of the role being played by the local courts, the county courts, in this context, in the context of the applications for evictions that are being revived in 10 days' time. The applications for evictions are processed by county courts, which are manned and women, that is, staffed by people who are essentially hostile to universal rights and universal kind of entitlements of people affected by the violations and robbery of their rights. And I think that that is what I was saying about Polly Toynbee. When Polly Toynbee wrote the piece and published on the Guardian website, now accessible as dated 2nd of February 2016, she didn't talk about the 990,000 people being evicted during 2015 as a result of the behavior of local councils. And one of the problems with the British mainstream Fleet Street media is that despite the fact that Britain is no longer an empire ruling the waves, Britannia ruling the waves, there is a very unhealthy, unreal, and untruthful obsession with the myth that Britain is an empire. So there is no direct control over the people of Africa or Asia, where most of the imperialist locations were. So the British, quote, establishment, the people who exercise power at various levels, local levels, central levels, have replaced their targets of imperialist behavior with the local native people, mostly white people, indigenous people, who they victimize and target and harass and deprive and disenfranchise. And what is happening here is that in the case of housing, I have said it's housing crisis is a wrong phrase. It's loss of housing human rights, and loss of housing rights affects various levels of losses of housing human rights, affect millions of people, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of people. Most of them are indigenous white people in low income and lower income groups. And the fact that during the period last year of Jeremy Corbyn in post as the leader of the opposition in the House of Commons and in this country was accompanied by a slogan, for the many, not the few. Although that was the slogan, and it is technically and numerically in terms of the actual effects of people, the feeling, the effects of the wrong policies, that is accurate. That is true. I accept that. But the policies of the Labour Party in Parliament and in the country as a whole has not corroborated or coincided or synchronized with that slogan. And today, the absence of Tangam Debonair, who is supposedly the parliamentary opposition spokesperson in the name of the Labour Party in the House of Commons, against the incumbent as Minister for Housing, Robert Jenrick. Although she is there in post, she has no policy. And this is not a coincidence, this is not an accident. The Labour Party has never had a real policy about delivering human housing rights or human rights on housing to the many. Never has. It has varieties of slogans at various times, and the latest one being when Corbyn was fronting the Labour Party just before this Keir Starmer took over. For the many, not the few. But the many are completely unheard. The behavior of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown combined, because Brown supported Blair on everything, despite his later kind of bogus claims that he didn't agree with Blair. He supported Blair on the wars against the people of Afghanistan, people of Iraq, and Brown supported Blair on the robbery of housing stock from the councils and the handing over of the housing stock to gangs of crooks, as happened when the crooks called Poplar Haque were given thousands of council properties by Tower Hamlets Council under pressure from John Prescott, who was the holder of the post as the DEFRA Secretary of State, which has been kind of redistributed to two different or three different departments since the Labour Party, fronted by Gordon Brown, lost the power in this country at the election in May 2010. So the gangsters that took over the housing stock in Tower Hamlets, say let's start with Tower Hamlets, were not required. They were not required as part of the deal to give an undertaking to deliver housing services and meet housing needs of the people in accordance with all the charters. I'm not talking about the 2011, 2000 local government act or whatever, or localism act of 2011, whatever. Because the focus of my analysis is internationally on international law, on international location, international obligations that the UK owes to its own so-called citizens and society under international treaties that the UK remains to this day active signatory to. And I give the headings: the international treaties, the international conventions, the international charters, the international agreements. These are all being violated by Britain, no matter who the government is, including when it is Labour government. That is the point. And I want to emphasize this as much as possible factually. Because if these treaties are being violated now, today, 11th of September 2020, by the Boris Johnson fronted Conservatives, the question legitimately arises: would the same violations take place if the occupants in the posts of power in this country were Labour Party occupants? And the answer, if we go by the records of the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, is that no, it would not have been different. I'm saying that, but I'm relying on the evidence, the records. And I'm saying also additionally that Jeremy Corbyn is a fantasist, because the last 40 years, 30 years, he has been active. He became an MP in the 1980s. So let's say that he became an MP almost 40 years ago. And Corbyn, as MP, has not delivered anything remotely resembling the program that must be initiated and brought into being by the government, locally and centrally, if the purpose of the policy is to meet people's housing rights and human rights. Now, let me invite the man himself, Jeremy Corbyn, to reply to this, because I am the person of all the commentators and observers and publishers and broadcasters anywhere in the world. I am the one who actually commented on his piece dated the 20th of September 2012 and carried in print by the Communist Morning Star. I call the Morning Star Scar because it is a distorter of the truth and the evidence. And that is a general description of the Morning Star, because although it has headlines, catchy headlines like these ones, it has catchy headlines like Trump's hate speech leaves the world at risk. It is true, but only to that extent. The Morning Star doesn't go into the details of how that can be tackled, exposed, and stopped and reversed. And like this one, this is the one about the refugees trying to cross the channel between France and England during August. And the refugees that were targeted by Boris Johnson, who threatened to break new kind of records and break new kind of or current existing obligations, international obligations, because all the treaties and the conventions and the charters and the declarations and agreements uphold the rights of people who seek refuges, and they do so under the circumstances caused by lack of security, safety, and amenities, if you like, to live free, independent, secure lives in their home countries or home lands when they are forced to leave those places, seeking refuge, literally, seeking asylum, literally, from persecution or regimes that were persecuting them at home. So it's not like a theory, it's not like a slogan that I am repeating. It is actually in the books, in the agreements, in the international agreements, which Britain is a signatory to. So Boris Johnson is actually one of the violators, one of the holders of decision-making, if you like, posts in Britain, who are responsible for causing violations of housing human rights, violations of human rights generally, violations of the rights to live with dignity and with adequate income and safety and security, wherever they are. And the local councils in Britain, the system is, the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic arrangement of administration is such that local councils are given the agency role to administer significant parts of the welfare kind of service that is supposed to be in existence. Service. In reality, most people find it a disservice. They are not served, but they are actually oppressed by. and the local councils in Tower Hamlets and Newham are two of the worst offenders against those rights and those services. And as I have been saying, when I spoke to Lutfur Rahman, who was for 5 calendar years in place as the executive mayor in the name of Tower Hamlets, Lutfur Rahman offered a response, first of all, physically, people witnessing me sitting in the kind of so-called public gallery side in the council, Tower Hamlets Council, while the so-called cabinet was meeting as chaired by Lutfur Rahman, would remember. And I remember the people who witnessed me sitting there. And one of the people I remember is the conservative councillor, Peter Golds, who must have thought, because he is a racist, prejudiced, and ignorant, he must have thought that Lutfur coming over to me and saluting me while I was sat in the public gallery was evidence of Lutfur having some kind of cozy arrangements with me. Nothing of the sort. Lutfur was staging that. Lutfur was staging that on more than one occasion, appearing to come to me and salute me and give me salam and everything in order to placate me, because he thought that I was there to attack him. I was not there to attack him, but I was there seeking answers to outstanding questions about Tower Hamlets Council corruption. Lutfur Rahman knew that, because I was not just sitting there, I had been in daily communications to him, demanding answers to an unlimited number of questions that arose from the unlimited acts of violations and lies being perpetrated by Tower Hamlets Council personnel concerned. And I did that directly to Lutfur Rahman and through his then principal main spokesperson, insofar as the council public relations was concerned, Alibor Chowdhury. In the ruling published on the 23rd of April 2015, Richard Maury, the election commissioner, who made the decision to kick Lutfur Rahman out of that post with immediate effect, Maury actually included only Alibor Chowdhury as the other person he was banning from public office for 5 years. So that just sums up the extent and the gravity of the role that Alibor Chowdhury was assigned by Lutfur Rahman. It's not my word. It is the fact on the record and based on the evidence before the election commissioner Richard Maury, that Alibor Chowdhury was the second person, the only other person among Lutfur Rahman's cabal of councillors who was named and acted on by the election commissioner. So it was Alibor Chowdhury who dealt with all the communications that I addressed to Lutfur Rahman based on the evidence of the gravity of the damage being done by the crooks making the decisions in the council. And the two of the crooks I have named already were Steve Hill, the so-called benefits manager, and the criminal called Colin Cormack, who was the housing options manager, so-called. Now, I have elaborated on these two before, but I'll just recap. Steve Hill is the criminal who perpetrated a serial set of lies to create a pretext to deny lawfully claimed and lawfully entitled to housing benefit. And he did that in collusion with, or as part of the conspiracy he hatched with Mike Tyrrell. Mike Tyrrell was the so-called chief executive for most of the years since the foundation of the THCH, Tower Hamlets Community Housing, which was the second largest gang of crooks that got the control of the Tower Hamlets Council's housing stock after Poplar Haque. Now, Steve Hill and Mike Tyrrell were the two crooks who conspired along with Colin Cormack. Now, to what extent they actually sat together or exchanged notes is a secondary matter. All of them behaved in a way that broke the law, and all of these were open to Lutfur Rahman to actually stop. And Lutfur Rahman, therefore, had to be told about this every single day, and he didn't stop them. In fact, he saluted me, he staged saluting me repeatedly, time after time, over the 5 years, remember? And he failed to stop the crooks and the liars. Whether he chose to fail or whether he failed because of incompetence, lack of knowledge, lack of ability, and lack of awareness is something that I will not go into details about, because that would require hours and hours of discussion about all the minute details. The essential fact is the Lutfur Rahman being accused by John Beeks on 22nd of September 2013, having a policy based on the prioritization of the needs of the, as Biggs inaccurately called it, Bengali community. It wasn't. Lutfur Rahman betrayed the whole community. And the betrayal could not be starker than what he did to the community organizations, to the campaigns, to the resources, and to the unique action archives that I created and I have been responsible for. And as I said previously, Lutfur Rahman broke the law on several occasions, including the fact that he included at a meeting that was supposed to be council business, held in the council building, about council decisions by Colin Cormack and Steve Hill. He included people from the community who had not been employed by the council, who had no legal right or entitlement to attend the meeting. He included those people. One was Kalam Chowdhury, also known as Abu Tahir Chowdhury, and the other one is the Channel S so-called political editor called Muhammad Jubair, who was paid hundreds of thousands of pounds by Lutfur, hundreds of thousands of pounds of the council money, public money, as if Muhammad Jubair was an advisor. He was not an employee of the council. An advisor to Lutfur Rahman, while he was at the same time, quote, appearing on Channel S as its political editor. That particular individual has been the subject of several external comments, including by local journalist at the time called Ted Jury, and he has been commented on by other sources. But Lutfur broke the law and had him attend a meeting that was supposed to be Lutfur and the party or parties concerned about council decision, nothing to do with external advice or community advice or connection with the party that was supposed to be in kind of being or in the offing, which transpired in the later years, called Aspire. So Abu Tahir or Kalam Chowdhury became chair of the Aspire, but that was years after the illegal abuse of the council powers or options that Lutfur applied and perpetrated when he invited them to be attending a meeting where Neither Steve Hill nor Colin Cormack was present, nor any other person from their sections was present. So Lutfur broke the law. And the point of my referring to this is that none of the people who criticized Lutfur Rahman for breaking the law or being corrupt, which is what Richard Morris said, Lutfur Rahman had got elected by corrupt means, fraudulent means. None of the people, including Peter Golds, the conservative, or their friend, the lawyer who represented the petitioners, not the petitioners, not their kind of statements anywhere, since the petition, even to this day, they filed the petition in June, I think, or before June 2014. And this is September 2020. So it's a good 6 years. And they have not made any comment about Lutfur's other illegal behavior. Now that shows that they didn't know the law, they didn't know the constitution, and they were not being advised by anyone who knew the law or the constitution. I have never had any conversation with any of the petitioners or their supporters or their propagandists or linked persons about any real details about their petition against Lutfur Rahman. I have only had any conversation with one, Debbie Simon, who was one of the Labour Party members, who was the fourth petitioner. But she never gave me any information as to how they did the petition, the details or anything. So I have had no direct conversation with any of the petitioners about the details of their motivation or their operation. And I never attended any of the actual hearings held in a building in the Royal Courts of Justice. It could have been held in a building in Tower Hamlets, but that is a tactical thing that they decided on staging in order to give the public profile to the petition. Essentially, the petitioners presented the claims based on witnesses from the Labour Party and other people, but I only have access to what has been published after the hearings and after the decision. So my sources are those that are published and publicly accessible. Having said that, during the hearing, I observed that they were not talking about the corruption in the council. Corruption in the council decision making and the lack of any accountability in the council over the criminal liars that are in place, had been in place in housing benefit and in homelessness section, so-called. Now that was in 2014 when the petition was submitted, and in 2015, just before the Mori declaration of the 23rd of April. So in between that time, let's say just 10 months or so. And in that 10 months, I observed various places that the petitioners were missing most of the evidence. Now, I did not offer myself as a witness. I made an observation. And that is still the case. And what is happening here is that since Lutfur Rahman was ousted and he was kind of stopped from standing for public office or holding a public office for 5 years, the awareness in Tower Hamlets among the voters and among the so-called petitioners about corruption has not made any difference. It has not had any traction as a public issue. It has completely faded away in terms of the impact on the democracy and on the rights of the people affected by the lack of democracy and accountability. And this has become obvious on every occasion. And I will not repeat the details, but except to refer to the fact that in the last 2 months, 3 months, I have been invited by so-called opponents of the mayor system to start a process of campaigning against the mayor system. I have never stopped campaigning against the mayor system, but not in the numbers of signatures that needed to be collected or in the numbers of people that would join me in the campaign. I remain actively opposed to the mayor system. So those who invited me to join them with my abilities and skills and whatever misunderstood my position and have confirmed my contempt for the liars in the community. Those who said that they would be competing with the mayor system and complaining against the mayor's inadequacies have stopped doing that. And that shows that they actually try to abuse me or abuse my generosity by using my commitment and my highly well-known profile against the mayor system and for democracy to suit some of their temporary purposes. Now, that is not something that is lost on me. I know what they were doing, and I don't rely on them. I don't actually depend on them. I am sharing my observations for wider knowledge, evidentially. So what happens when the benefit manager fabricates and engages in fraud and lies? When people like Muhammad Harun, the councillor, or Shahid Ali, the councillor, or other councillors are caught involved in doing housing fraud, they are prosecuted. But what happens when the housing benefit manager is a liar? Not about those two, but liar against other people who are completely being denied their lawful housing benefit rights. There is nothing in the council that actually holds them accountable. So there is a free for all, there is a license to lie and cause severe losses to human rights and to other rights, and the wealth and the resources of the community can be caused severe damage to by these liars. And the lies that Steve Hill confected and manipulated along with Colin Cormack and Mike Tyrrell are in need of being told A to Z, chapter and verse. And this particular statement here in this video should be treated as an updated introduction to that series of lies that will be published here by the Khoodeelaar campaign. And as I said before, the damage they have done to the resources of the community and the original work for the community, the exclusive, world exclusive intellectual work that I have been doing, they are worth more than the combined wealth, reported wealth of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Bill Gates combined. That is what I am asserting. Yes, I am asserting that. And that will be given details of chapter and verse 1 to 100. And additionally, liable in the lies and the corruption, additionally to Lutfur Rahman, is Ruxana Fiaz, is John Biggs. And these are facts, these are evidence that can be tested, verified by reference to actual communications that still exist and will exist forever. Evidence that are contained in the communications that I have been principally responsible for initiating and continuing and updating and elaborating on and substantiating. So in the case of Newham Council. There is identical set of lying that exists in the structure of the council. There is no accountability for liars in place in posts in the council making decisions to rob lawfully made claimants and lawfully entitled claimants of their rights. And that is what happens under the cover of the banner that the Guardian runs, for example, talks about the DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions. That is the general description. I have a different name, the Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation Department. Deprivation, D, Want, W, and P is poverty. So the Department for Deprivation, Want, and Poverty is normally kind of cited as the department that is depriving the people in the setting of bedroom tax and all the universal credit and disabled disabled claimants being forced to commit suicide in their thousands, as happened. But these references to the DWP only actually hide the extent and the reality and the truth of the role of the local councils, labor councils, doing as much or sometimes even worse damage and harm to the claimants. So we shall be talking about those in the correct editions. And this is the edition that is coming to an end at 8 minutes past midday on Friday, the 11th of September 2020.